name's Richard, this is We're Not Wizards, and today we're going to be looking at Endangered, which is designed by Joe Hopkins and it's published by Grand Gamers Guild. It originally came to Kickstarter and successfully funded, and in the next couple of weeks there's going to be some expansions or additional modules which are going to be released for this game. So I thought I'd give you, for people who haven't heard of the game before or aren't aware of how it plays, I thought I'd give you some kind of general thoughts on it, as well as an idea on how the game plays itself. So sit back and enjoy the Eye of the Tiger. So, Endangered is a cooperative game. What we mean by that is that the players are working together to achieve a common goal, and in this case you are working to either help save either tigers or sea otters from from basically becoming totally extinct. And the way you do that is by gaining enough influence with some basically an international committee who are hopefully going to be passing some laws which are going to prevent the utter extinction of these animals. It's a dice placement game, and that means that during the game you will be rolling dice, and you'll be using the results to place the dice on action cards in order to activate them and allow you to take certain actions. The game itself breaks into a number of rounds. The first round is you're going to be playing actions. Now, there isn't a turn order in this game as per such. The game itself, each round is basically it's called a year, and the number of years will vary based on the number of players that you have in play. So for instance, for a 2-player game, the entire game will last kind of up to 9 rounds. In a, say, like a 5-player game, you'll only get really 4 rounds before you reach the final kind of decision, and that is based around a voting year. So twice in the game there is a voting year that takes place where you decide whether or not the delegates that you've been trying to influence have been persuaded enough to help pass legislation for you. So at the beginning of the round, what you'll do is you'll decide amongst yourselves who's going to go first, and that will be based on the rolls of the dice that you've made, because in the action phase you can play cards from your deck. You can play cards from your deck based on placing your dice. You can help just get rid of some deforestation. You can gain some money. You can gain some influence into the World Council. But interestingly enough, your dice rolls, you're only allowed to place your dice on a different card every time, so you can't spam effectively an effect. And secondly, if you're placing a dice where somebody else has placed a dice before, the value of your dice actually needs to be higher, this comes round into kind of like the turn order thing. When you decide somebody's going to take their turn, you're going to place their turn order marker, and it's going to go on top of the calendar. Once once everybody's played, then you effectively move on to the end of the year. So the actual turn order itself is potentially going to change based on who's rolled well and who's rolled potentially quite poorly. Interestingly enough, action cards, everybody has their own set of cards because we're playing kind of different characters. So we've got like a lobbyist, an environmental lawyer, a TV wildlife host, you've got like a zoologist, you've got a philanthropist. They've all got special kind of skills that they bring to the table, and they've also got their own special deck that they bring to the table as well. And as you play your cards, you don't play your cards in front of you, you're actually going to end up playing your cards to expand the action pool on the board. And what that means is, as the game goes on, the number of actions that are available to everybody kind of increases. which means that it means that in terms of cooperation, there has to be a lot more discussion going on, even down to potentially the cards that you might want to play in that particular round. But it's nice that, and I like the fact that the actions that are available will increase as kind of time goes on through the years based on what you've had. Once you've gone into your action phase, you then go into the breeding phase. Now, if there's pairs within your map, then they will produce offspring, and based on the type of animal, for instance in tigers, when you have a breeding pair, they will produce an offspring which needs to go onto an adjacent square, but then in turn one of the animals has to also go to an adjacent square as well. What that means is, in terms of, you can't just continually try to go for breeding pair after breeding pair, because you've also got these deforestation markers, and as the game moves on and the deforestation, or in terms of the sea otters, you get more pollution kind of happening, then quite simply you're running out of space. And if an animal can't enter into a space, it's basically lost. It's you're not able to play that animal at all. Once you've done that, you'll go into either your deforestation or pollution phase, which can be a little bit of a scunner, because it's a random dice roll. So you roll your dice, and then you've got columns and rows, and you ended up with a kind of like the dice numbers on each. And based on the columns or the rows that you select, you'll need to add in kind of more pollution. It's the first kind of bit of randomness that can really mess things up and cause a little bit of a kind of a cascading damage, depending on how you're playing for kind of later on. If this wasn't kind of bad enough, every single round, the next thing that you'll do is you'll also play like an impact card. Now, you're probably watching this and you're thinking there's an awful lot of a similarity here, possibly with like Pandemic, that you're trying to kind of cure something and stop something from happening. Whereas in the difference with an Endangered, you're really kind of preventing the worst case scenario from happening. So the purpose of the impact cards is that there'll be one-off impacts that you will play during the game. But also what will happen is you'll also have kind of persistent impacts as well. And these persistent impacts will not get resolved. They'll stay on the table until, and in case of the tigers, you'll get a tiger sighting. And that will trigger off 2 or 3 potentially devastating effects on the board. That could be, you could lose a tiger next to deforestation tile. You could actually have to roll again for deforestation. You might just lose an animal kind of outright. As the time goes on, you've got to look at getting rid of these, because if you don't get rid of them, then you've got, just a disaster just kind of waiting to happen. And in terms of the first couple of games that I've played, that's what happened. It was the impact cards which really kind of messed things up for me. But that was because you can't pay attention just to one thing in the game. You've got to be looking after your delegates. You've got to be looking at managing your animal population. You've got to be trying to raise funds. You've got to be trying to control your deforestation. And that kind of that's something which you have to plan for, and kind of in order to, you're essentially trying to buy yourself enough time so you can build yourself enough influence so you can cause like a 4 yes vote amongst the delegates, and that itself means that your work can be very, very much kind of cut out indeed. The gameplay goes on until you either get down to kind of having 0 animals or 1 animal left, or you run out of actual, deforestation or pollution tiles, or you have your second vote, and you don't have enough yes votes to garner and to kind of cause the resolutions to happen. In terms of my thoughts on the game, Endangered's had a strange journey. In fact, that it was kind of one of these games that it didn't do amazingly well on Kickstarter. It funded, but there was so much potential for it to do an awful lot more. I mean, essentially, every game comes with like a couple of modules, and the plan was to allow you to expand to have kind of like further modules in the game of other endangered species, which means, in a strange point of view, the game that you end up playing is the kind of the best of what they could put together based on the funds that they have. And funnily enough, it's having to rely on, I don't mean this against any other game, but it's actually needing to rely on, it has to be a very, very good game in order for you to see by, maybe the things that could have been better in the production. Now, that's not necessarily fair, because the production values in the game are absolutely excellent. The artwork for each of the character cards, and indeed in the cards themselves, are decent. But hats off to kind of like each of the individual kind of player boards, because they are kind of like completely reversible, so you can play kind of different characters as you kind of go. But it kind of like it's really hit the spot for me in terms of, it was kind of like pandemic, and you can't avoid the kind of like this, or like say Subterra, or any kind of cooperative game where you're trying to divert the kind of the worst disaster that could possibly happen. It's based very much around a very thin kind of balancing line of it. And I guess the difference with Endangered is it's also trying to bring across a message of how precarious the actual situation is, with the animals that feature in the game as well. So you'll lose a reasonable amount of times through trying to juggle between the actual practical application of saving the animals and also trying to balance up and make sure you win through in the legislation. But you never, and it's down to kind of like microcosms of decisions that you've made. If you'd maybe kind of raised some money there instead of playing a card, if you'd moved an animal kind of one space when you had the opportunity, if you had decided to get rid of kind of like a persistent effect on the game, then that would have had an effect, and you probably would have won. And in that way, I was kind of really, really impressed with the games that I've played, is that you win and you lose, and when you win, you're sometimes not always sure exactly how you win, because you did the right thing at the right time. And when you lose, it's sometimes a case of it is just by the smallest little thing. So that appeals. It's not like it's a drastic annihilation that you're sitting there going, and it takes the enjoyment out of it, because sometimes games can be, for no better reason, kind of unwittingly cruel and punishing the player, and there's no way back. Whereas Endangered, it's almost, there's a lot of thought that's gone into the balance to make sure that you are trapping precariously through the game itself. For people who enjoy Pandemic and are looking for something maybe slightly different, for people who enjoy cooperative games in general and are looking for something that is very easy to learn, but incredibly kind of a lot more trickier to kind of fully get to grips with all the available strategies, it's definitely one I would certainly consider. As I say, there's going to be, I believe there's a Kickstarter coming soon which will not only hopefully reprint the original game, but it's also going to add some additional kind of expansions. And this is the good thing about it, is because the modules are based around different endangered species, there's nothing wrong with this having expansion after expansion after expansion, which to me is very, very cool. So if you're wanting something where if you like cooperative games, if you're not looking for something that's kind of like you're going to end up with somebody quarterbacking because of a lot of kind of randomness and the random setup anyway, the kind of the potential to quarterback kind of does drop quite considerably as you're playing the game. If you're looking for something that doesn't take ages to play, I mean, you can literally play this game within about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how you play. If you're looking for something that has actually the solo game works really well as well, and its own thing, and it's not just brought in. The solo game itself is actually you just picking kind of like two characters and you just play out the roles, and I've not noticed any difference between playing a solo game and playing like a multiplayer game. And in fact, with the solo game, I've actually been cheeky and I've decided to play with three characters instead of two, just to kind of increase the number of years and potentially increase the number of difficulty. So yeah, I like this a lot. If you know of anybody who's got the game, just grab them and get them to get it to the table. If you see a chance to kind of grab it yourself, then yeah, definitely I would consider it. So this is Endangered. It's Grand Gamers Guild, designed by Joe Hopkins. My name's Richard. This is We're Not Wizards. Thank you for watching. If you like what you've seen, give us a thumbs up. If you don't, give us a thumbs down, or a funny comment, or a sarcastic comment, or anything you feel. Or drop us a subscription, because that's always nice. We're always trying to grow the channel. But until the next time, stay safe. Roll. Now, bound to roll a 6. Bound to. 1. 1. Roll 6 is 2. Out of that. That's ridiculous. And make something awful. But until the next time. I was going to sing The Eye of the Tiger, but I'd need a backing track and it costs money. So, nah.